jungle room, the vines hang deep. Breeze and raindrops as the emerald boa slither. Face to face they draw their guests in close. Their calm invites us to come hither. Every corner built for curious mind. A jungle playground, nature design. Build them homes, let instincts flow. Babies born, tiny lives begin to grow.
Greetings! Welcome to the Happy Basins podcast on the Untamed and Unhinged Reptile Podcast Network on YouTube. We're here today with Jeremy TURGEON. Jeremy, did I say your last name correctly? I didn't know if it was a hard or a soft G.
Close to the soft G. It's like surgeon.
Surgeon.
Yep.
Very good. Jeremy TURGEON. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's
And
either one works for me.
Yeah, I'm sure you're used to it. You've been getting it your whole life.
Yeah,
you probably
exactly.
Quit correcting people around second grade.
right, exactly.
Guys, Jeremy's here from Brassman Reptiles, and Jeremy and I have followed each other on social media for a while, but I actually did not know about all of his accomplishments until we were going to talk, and I started doing some research. Jeremy, wow.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And you started off with bellied toads and moved on to all of this.
Yeah. It's definitely crazy to think, starting from a little fire-bellied toad to go on to do some of the stuff that I've gotten to do and work with some of the species I've gotten the chance to work with. It's, if you were to tell 5-year-old me that that's what was going to happen, I would call you crazy. But
that's a dream, just a total dream come true. Amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, we're all looking forward to hearing it. Do you have a lowdown of your?
Yeah. So the I guess there's no real short version, but the abbreviated version. So when I was maybe like 5 or so years old, I went to the local pet shop with my mom. We had to go get dog food, and I saw in their exotics department, which was just a wall in the back, they had fire-bellied toads. And of course, I'd seen frogs before. You see a picture of a frog in a book in a library, but what caught my attention was there was one that was kind of like up on the glass, and Chinese fire-bellied toads with this bright orange belly with these black spots. And I lost my mind. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So young me threw a temper tantrum. And by the time we were leaving that store, I had a new fire-bellied toad and enclosure and all of that. And I was enthralled by it. It was just the coolest little thing in the world. And I already liked dinosaurs and reading books on dinosaurs. So, the next best thing is reptiles and amphibians. So from there, went to green anoles. And then leopard geckos, and then bearded dragons. So my mom at the time was very much against snakes being in the house. Lizard she was cool with, frogs she was cool with, but snakes were like a big no at the time. And I accidentally bred the green anoles. Again, I'm very young, like 6, 7, 8 years old. So I didn't know I had a pair. I just knew I had 2. And one day I went into the enclosure and was like, oh, that's a weird poop. And it turned out to be an egg, and the egg hatched, and it had a baby green anole. It's like, oh man, this is so cool. Fast forward, getting into the leopard geckos, tried to do the same thing with leopard geckos, bred them, and I would sell them back to that same local pet shop or to friends. Certainly not getting rich quick, but just enjoying the experience, and it was cool to have friends get an animal from me and be like, man, it looks so cool. I love look at the cage I just set up, and I loved that stuff. And then finally, it was my 11th birthday, so 6 years later. My mom finally let me know that she had been thinking about letting me get a snake, and I was like, game on, let's go. And that was really what opened the floodgates. I started with a little corn snake. from a local Petco, and unfortunately a lot of times we experience with the big box pet shops, stuff just isn't cared for properly, and unfortunately that snake didn't survive. So ended up going back to that same mom and pop pet shop, and they had just gotten in some ball pythons. And it took a little bit of research on my mom's end to understand that not all pythons are monster snakes that get huge, but she knew that I was into it. So she was like, well, let me do a little bit of research and make sure that this is cool. So we agreed on a ball python, went to that local pet shop, and they had just gotten a new order in. So they opened up the enclosure, and back then it was just normal ball pythons in your pet shop. You didn't have access to the cool mutations at all. So I saw this one really pretty, lighter, reduced pattern snake, and I was like, that's it. That's the one I want. It looks different than all the rest. That's what I want. And I brought that snake home, loved that snake. I had that snake for 18 years.
Oh,
She passed away only because she had actually gotten egg bound, unfortunately, and those complications, she wasn't able to survive through those complications, which is incredibly unfortunate, and still bugs the crap out of me to this day. It's probably
is that a common thing with age?
Ironically, no. I've had numerous friends breed ball pythons well into their 20s with no issues. So I'm not sure what the cause was. I was at that point with that particular animal, I was just too distraught to even bother trying to figure it out. I was like, I know it's egg bound, and that was just kind of what it was. But yeah, in the meantime, keeping that snake, my mom, I was like, I want to try breed snakes. I've been breeding the lizards. I want to try breeding snakes. And, tentatively was given an okay. And by the time I moved out of my parents' house, I had probably 150 snakes across, I don't know how many different species. And at my peak in one bedroom of this 2-bedroom apartment that I was born and raised in, I worked with probably about 37 or so different species of reptiles and amphibians.
Wow.
And bred the vast majority of them except for the amphibians. They always eluded me because there's a lot more effort that had to go in than what I had space and time for. But
go mom.
yeah, mom is a saint. Mom used to, once she kind of got really familiar with them, she used to come into the reptile room and help me clean stuff. She fell in love with my carpet pythons. So she would be like, hey, if you're cleaning carpets, let me know. I'll hold one so you can clean the tub and everything. So I used to bring carpet pythons out into the kitchen, and she would just hold them and spend time with them while I would clean the bins. And that was amazing, to go from very tentative space to, where's the carpet pythons? I want some carpet pythons.
That is incredible.
And, it's great. I definitely miss it. I haven't lived at home for many years, and I still to this day, when I talk to my mom, she's like, I do kind of miss having snakes in the house. Like it was a fun period of time. She's like, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to have my entire apartment back. But
yes. Yeah, they give you a special feeling for sure.
Absolutely. But yeah, so through the midst of that, just navigating those channels and networking with people, I spent some time. I was the facility manager for New England Reptile Distributors, or NERD, for about 3 years.
Yeah, we want to talk about that for sure.
Absolutely. And then about 3.5 years ago, I made the move to North Carolina, and took a chance on myself. I also work as a musician. I'm a professional trumpet player, hence Brassman Reptiles.
Yeah.
So took a chance on myself.
Where Brassman came from.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So yeah, took the chance on myself, and was like, I wanted to pursue. I had some musical opportunities pop up here in North Carolina, and was like, I'm not getting any younger, and I want to take this chance and take this opportunity. And almost 4 years in, and we're still crushing it, and I'm incredibly grateful.
Wonderful. And how many years has it been since you were 5 years old?
A long time. I'll be I gotta think I'll be 33 this year. So it's been a little while. Yeah. So I'm still young, but it's been a while.
Yeah, you're still young, but in the animal world, that is old.
Yeah.
Because importing all those animals hasn't been going on for 100 years.
Right. Exactly. No, and I'm very lucky that very early in my development and career working with reptiles, I met some really great people. I became really good friends with Kevin at NERD when I was in my early teens. and not long after that, got to meet and hang with Brian Barczyk, and they became two of my closest mentors and friends, as well as my good friend Adam Harris, who was the first person that took me seriously when I said I wanted to work with snakes professionally. And those three guys really helped kind of cultivate my trajectory in the industry, and were the people that I was able to call to get answers to questions and get pointed in the right direction. And I'm very, very thankful for that. I still talk to Kevin and Adam frequently, or not as frequently as I'd like, but certainly still frequently. And, talk to Brian as much as I could, especially that last year or so that we had with him. So I'm just very, very thankful for all those opportunities and chances. And, because of that, a lot of other doors opened for me to network with other people and get experiences with other animals. And that was, I'm not, I don't take it for granted. That's what I'm trying to say. I realized that it was very, very special opportunity, and I'm just incredibly thankful for it.
Amazing. Yes, that would be just incredible to work with either of those fellas, let alone both of them.
Right.
Legends.
Right.
They're both
Yeah.
legends.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you learned so much.
I did. And
about
I
animals and
also,
business.
yes, 100%. And, we used to joke, back in 2011 was the first time I went to go visit BHB Reptiles. This was pre-Reptarium, pre-zoo. It was just his full-scale breeding facility. And at the time, Kevin and Brian were very much at the top of the ball python game, but they had two very different desires for ball pythons. Kevin really liked the reduced pattern, bright colored animals that really just looked like nothing ever before. And Brian really enjoyed the earth tone stuff, heavy pattern, darker animals. So the first time I went to go visit BHB, Kevin called me out of the blue and was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm in Michigan. I'm with Brian." And he was like, what are you doing there? Looking at dirt."
Yep, I don't know those two guys, but I know those personalities when it's
yes.
like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, there was a one time Brian had come to film at Nerd, and I grew up 2 hours from Nerd, so it was very easy to get up there. And I had heard that Brian was coming, and I think I was supposed to be in school or something, and I'd like totally ditched it for the day. I was like, I'm going to hang with these two guys because they're never together at the same time. So I was like, this is going to be really fun, and I don't want to miss it.
I bet. When working with those guys, can you tell us like some of the things that you really learned, like the experiences you felt inside you that changed or helped develop what you're doing now? I know there's good stuff in there.
There definitely is. I think that the biggest thing that I took away from both of them, and including Adam Harris, was collection diversity, especially to try to pursue this as a business and exist in this industry as a business. And largely because it's very cyclical. Things come in and out of popularity, and if you are kind of pigeonholed into one or two species, if you're on the back end of that cycle, sales are slow, expenses don't get cheaper, and if you're stuck with more babies because those sales have slowed down, your expenses are actually going up. So how do you mitigate that? So that was probably the biggest thing that I learned from all of them, was species diversity. And I was totally okay with that because I like everything about reptiles. So it worked out for me. But with Kevin, I learned a lot more about genetics, understanding genetics, as well as animal behavior, and paying attention to those very, very subtle movements and behaviors across multiple species. With Brian, I learned more about interfacing with staff, working with people, and kind of navigating a bit more of the business side of things. Which was incredibly helpful. Kevin's always had kind of somebody that can handle that side for him. He's like, I just want to look at animals. I don't want to think about business. And I get that 100%. Yeah, 100%. But yeah, so it was great to learn both sides. And even even later on with Brian, like I watched Brian step away from the sales side, especially once the Reptarium started going and the zoo started to really grow and develop. He fell more in love with the animal behavior side, and like he obviously understood how to read his animals, but there's a next level when you start working with them in that capacity versus having them in racks and doing all of that stuff. So he had stepped away from the sales side to the point where I had visited him one time and was going through just looking at colubrids that they had produced and saw this pair of corn snakes that I was like, oh man, like I wonder if these are for sale, because I'd really like these. And I mentioned it to him and he's like, you got to go talk to Lori. And I was like, yeah, just stop. What do you want for the corn snakes, man? Like, come on. He's like, no, dude, I'm serious. You got to talk to Lori. I don't do anything sales related. I don't want to do anything sales related. And at first I was like, are you serious? Like what? But
who are you talking to?
yeah. I'm like, we've known each other for over 10 years, bro. Come on. Like, what are you talking about? But but I got it. I understood it. I respected him more for it. Of just like, no, it doesn't matter that I've known you for that long. Like, I've stepped away from sales. Like, I just want to be focused on the animals and stuff. And ended up going to Lori, knocking on her door, and found out the snakes I wanted were her holdbacks, but I was able to finagle some other second line holdbacks out of her.
Nice.
But yeah, those were definitely the things that I took away a lot. And I was grateful to have both of them in that way. So I wasn't just leaned one side over the other. Especially when at that time I was still young, trying to figure all of this out and how to navigate both worlds. Because as long as the industry's been around and there's been money getting moved around, there's been a lot of debate on the efficacy of making money dealing with live animals and all that stuff, and how to do that as ethically as possible. So to have both sides of it was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, what a great diverse set of experiences. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
All the way from the type of ball pythons to they had to their strengths in their business. You got your cup filled.
Yeah.
I saw
Absolutely.
Markham, you asked a question earlier. What species has he seen like rise to the top and fall and come back? What has come back?
Ball
and also,
pythons.
Markham, ball pythons, yeah, they come and go.
Yeah.
I also want to say to Markham, yes, I threw a math question in there, but then I was impressed a second ago. Jeremy used cyclic and pigeonhole, which are also math terms. So
yes. Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about Markham's question about the ball python rise and fall and rise and fall and rise.
Yeah. It's going back to the comment of things being cyclical. I like to pick on ball pythons because they've been such a big part of my career, and I know a lot of those guys in that part of the industry. But the reality is, it's happened with colubrids. I've seen it happen with carpet pythons and blood pythons and stuff. Like right now, we're starting to see the rise of blood pythons with the pieds and all this other wonderful stuff, which is great. But inevitably, it will fall as prices drop and people get bit because they don't know what they're doing. And, it goes right back to that kind of adage of that species. But ball pythons in particular, it's a very morph-driven element of the hobby. It's a very project-driven element of the hobby. Is it new math? No, it's not that new math. I do the correct math, sir.
Well, let's not start talking about that, okay?
Fair. Because
I can talk about new math all day and night.
Yeah.
Parker.
But yeah, so with ball pythons, because it's so project driven, we really see what falls in and out of favor and how that impacts market trends, right? So if we were to look at something like corn snakes, which is arguably another heavily morph driven species, because they've been around for so long, they're an easy to breed species and have such a high fecundity, we're producing large numbers of corn snakes. And they make great pets. They're great for the pet trade, which is the largest aspect of reptile keepers, is in the pet trade. So it works out. It kind of balances out. But because of that, also, the prices have plateaued. They've kind of existed and sat around the same place, which keeps, average market sale moving really smoothly. across the board. With ball pythons, we have that same amount of attention, but we've publicized the breeding of ball pythons in particular, as a business versus as just enjoying the snake. And cool, you can breed these things and make something else cool. That's awesome. You can do the same thing with corn snakes, but the difference is it's not raking in 10 grand. So it becomes very, very driven by those projects. So the rise and fall, I think we see it with various economic recessions and ebbs and flows as well. When people have money, they're more willing to buy a cool snake. When they don't, they don't. The extreme scenario of that was COVID. We watched people buy in droves during COVID. And then, now that's done. No more stimulus checks, no more anything. We're freaking out about the economy, and people aren't buying ball pythons like that.
It's like, don't feed the wild animals because they'll get too used to the food. And that's what happened.
Exactly. So, I think we started to see that. And I think with this iteration of this ebb and flow of ball pythons, we're seeing it take longer to kind of bounce back, because we've never seen what we saw with COVID in our lifetime, and the economy hasn't seen that in like 100 years, and technology is different. There's so many new variables that are happening now that weren't happening the last time there was a massive pandemic. So and because of that influx of people that were buying in that time, they are now starting to breed those snakes because they bought babies or maybe yearlings or whatever. So now the market's getting flooded by stuff that may have also fallen out of popularity on this trend movement based on different projects. So now the market just gets inundated with the same genetic byproduct from a bunch more people. So you see those folks, myself included, that are used to this kind of ebb and flow, and we're just like, okay, we're going to breed a little less. I might breed for a project that I'm specifically trying to work towards, but I don't need to go make 100 clutches of ball pythons. It just doesn't make any sense. And then you see the people who don't quite get that, and they're like, yeah, we're going hard, we're breeding everything, and then they sit on all those babies, and then inevitably, not all the time, there are some people that are the exception to the rule, of course, but inevitably a large percentage of those people end up selling everything and just liquidate and get out because they're frustrated. It's draining them financially. And the reality is our expenses, whether you have one snake or 100 snakes or 500 snakes, our expenses are going up. It's just how it is. I've watched rodent food prices here in North Carolina go up almost $10 in 3 years per bag. So that, of course, if you're a rodent breeder and you've got to buy 3 pallets of rodent food and it's now almost doubled in price, of course your rodent prices have to go up to meet that cost. So then we have to take that. But do ball python projects jump up? No. Or do prices jump up? I mean, no, they go down. So it doesn't quite make sense. And I think the final element of this, because I know this has been a long answer, is this industry does not scale the same way your average non-live animal business would scale. So the way I like to describe it is, let's say you have one CB70 rack of ball pythons. So you've got 30 snakes, and let's say it's 10 males and 20 females. And let's say you that's what you've got, and you breed them and you have 100% success. You get 20 clutches and you make 10 grand and you're super happy. That's great. Your expenses are low. Doesn't take too much of your time. You're feeling confident. So of course you would think, okay, well, let me invest. I've got some holdbacks. Let me get another rack and go from there. We'll get another 30 snakes. Okay, cool. Maybe on the labor side, that's not too much more if you have that flexibility in your schedule. But now you've doubled your expenses from electricity to feeders to bedding. You've doubled all of this. And now you've split your attention and you've doubled the amount of animals that need it. So now let's say you have 40 females and maybe 30 of them go. So still good odds, but it wasn't 100%. But depending on what your genetic odds are, because breeding is a game of chance when it comes to the genes. Let's say you only make 10 grand again. Your income is not going to double because you doubled the amount of snakes that you have. it's just not how this works. And if you're not working a project that at that moment is in popularity or in demand, then you're getting stuck holding on to babies that are just going to cost you more and more and more. And you inevitably either liquidate or you try to wholesale stuff out to maybe another breeder or to a local pet shop, and you end up losing money. So when you start to actually look at the numbers and do your taxes, like some of you reptile people should be doing, uh, you start looking at it and you start freaking out and being like, oh my God, I had to put, $5,000 of my own money this year into that. I could have gone on vacation. It starts to change the lens that you're looking at everything in. And I think that's the space that we've found ourselves in for like the last 2 years, has really been like, oh, this doesn't quite work. So, but going back to the whole like cause and effect of it is, I think it's largely with ball pythons because we've done such a tremendous job highlighting how cool it is to breed ball pythons, but we put a lot of emphasis on the financial gain versus any other species that's like, I just keep it and breed it because I love it. I think it's cool. I'm excited about the snake. I don't care if it's $50 or $5,000. But it's really easy to get somebody to click on a video when you say $20,000 rare snake. It's really easy for somebody to go click on a video then.
Yes. And you were talking about people liquidating a collection. I see Tim answered here, Intrepid Exotics said that, yes, he sees that everything you said about the reptile. He is working to liquidate a beautiful collection, a diverse collection of all kinds of gorgeous animals. And when you make an investment like that and spend years building it up, it's just like selling a business and not getting, anything out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard.
Exactly.
So Tim, we wish you the best of luck. If anybody's looking for a diverse
100%.
Collection of animals to sift through and see if one might catch your heart, you can click over to Intrepid Exotics and check out Tim's list. Pretty good. I guess you've seen it, Jeremy. You acted like
Yeah. I saw it. Tim's a great guy, and I wish him the best on what some of the stuff he's got coming up and is working through, and certainly having to part ways with animals that you love and have put time into like that is really tough. So yeah, definitely go check him out, Intrepid Exotics, and hit him up if you're looking for something, because he's got some great animals, and he's put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into making sure that those are some of the best animals possible.
Yes, absolutely. They're very loved pets as well as, and the cool thing about Tim's animals is he uses them as ambassadors. They're ambassador ready. So if anybody's looking for a turnkey ambassadorship program or handlers for zoos, educational programs, all kinds of cool stuff. That's a real special aspect of Tim's animals. Tim, thanks for being here today. I'm glad we got to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing I was going to ask you when you were chatting, because I know of at least two of my friends watching here. Well, my mother-in-law, I'm sure. Thank you, Nan, for always being here. And for Mr. LP Parker, they have no idea what a morph is. So I know that most of us do, but I personally just learned about morphs 4 years ago. So you talked about the difference between Brian and Kevin. Brian wanting the earth tone animals and Kevin with the bright animals, which I'll just throw in there real quick. I wanted to say too, is that Kevin is like the world record for creating the most morphs. So that's when I thought, well, before I say that, we better know what morphs are. So just a quick little explanation on that.
Yeah, 100%. So basically a morph is an animal that doesn't look like what the animal should look like if it was in the wild. So very simply, to use a really basic example, an albino animal is obviously not a normal, and it's also something that can be reproduced. So of course there are random flukes, where excuse me, where an animal might have reduced pattern or an overall light color. That doesn't necessarily make it a morph. It just makes it a random genetic variance. So a morph has to be something that's notably different than what the animal would look like in the wild, and is also genetically reproducible.
And like he was saying, the morphs of the ball pythons, one person liked brown colors and earth tones and dark patterns, where the other liked to create animals with bright colors. And that's what ball pythons are known for, is I mean, you can pay $50 for a ball python, or you can pay $50,000 for a ball python, depending on the morph. It's insane.
100%. When I first started going up to Nerd, so I was maybe 13, 14 years old.
Wow, everybody's
yeah.
dream.
Yeah, right. I was like, okay, you know, this is cool. At the time, I really didn't know. I didn't have a full understanding of who Kevin was at that time. And then going there, I was like, whoa, okay, this is wild, you know. And then after I figured it out and was like, holy crap, you know, like that was so cool.
I'll just real quick, I want to say the first time I ever met Kevin, I was at a one of the Reptile shows with Dave Kaufman, and Kevin started asking me questions about emeralds, and I didn't know who he was, and we left, and Dave said, do you know who that was? And I said, yeah, that's one of my favorite girls' boyfriend, Tara Byron's boyfriend. And Dave's like, well, more than that. And then it told me who he was. So I know that feeling.
That's awesome. I love when people don't know who Kevin is, because he's very used to people knowing who he is. So, yeah. I'm like, how do you feel after that? They didn't know who the hell you were, dude. Oh man. But
so yeah, 13, you didn't know who he was exactly, totally.
Really,
and he wasn't then what he is today.
Right, exactly. I mean, like, people knew who he was. Obviously, you know, he had all the knowledge, all the crazy combos and stuff, but I didn't know. I had a friend who knew him very well, who knew that I really liked snakes and was working with snakes, and he was like, you got to meet, you know, Kevin at Nerd. And I was like, I don't know who that is. And he was like, well, you're about to, you know. And that was kind of my introduction to Kevin. But yeah, like getting to, he arguably had one of the most diverse genetic collections of ball pythons at that time. You know, and I joke with him, and he'll never admit it, but I think it's the truth. I don't think he really started taking me seriously until I started asking him really specific genetic questions. I think he thought I was just going up there to annoy him and his staff and see cool snakes. But I very vividly remember going there and asking him about the granite gene in ball pythons. So he founded a gene called hidden gene woma. And so many of the things that he was producing were hidden gene woma and granite. And it was like everything coming out of Nerd was just hidden gene woma granite, hidden gene woma granite. And I'm like, I've seen what a regular granite looks like, and I've seen a hidden gene woma. I don't see what I would expect a hidden gene woma granite to look like in everything you have labeled as hidden gene woma granite. So I was like, what? How do you tell granite? And he's like, what? And he grabs me by the arm and pulls me into the ball python breeding room. And he opens up a drawer, and he's like, see that dot behind the head? And I was like, yeah. He's like, that's granite. And I'm like, what are you freaking crazy, dude? Like, one dot? And it's like, it's a big, like, spot of black. But I'm like, how? Like, I don't get it. And so he showed me a million examples of hidden gene woma granite combos. And I'm like, well, so what's it look like without granite? And he's like, well, I'm glad you asked. And then goes to the other side and pulls open a bunch. And they all the non-granite hidden gene womas did not have that dot. And the pattern was significantly cleaner and more precise than in the granite animals. And I was like, holy crap. And that was when I knew, like, his attention to detail had far surpassed anybody else's in the ball python game at that point. Because I was like, there's no way that a little blotch signifies this mutation, but it sure enough did. And ironically, I have had that moment many times with people since then when they're trying to figure out granite, and I'm like, look at that dot. And they all look at me the same way I probably looked at Kevin back then.
And when Kevin sent me tons and tons of pictures, 10 million trillion pictures of all of his emeralds, and he kept saying, did you see the granite one?
Yeah.
You know, and I kept saying, I'm going to go back and look through all the pictures, and as soon as I have time to sit with it, you know. And then he says, did you see the granite one?
Yeah.
So yes, he's made quite an uproar in the emerald world, trying to do some cool stuff with the emeralds.
Yeah, 100%. If there's one thing that I can say about Kevin is he certainly moves to the beat of his own drum. And he will certainly take input from external sources, especially those that he thinks are doing it well and doing it right and having
Yeah,
success. But he will very much absorb that and look at what he's doing and how he's doing things and figure out how to tweak things and push the envelope forward. And I know within the Emerald community and some other reptile communities, he has frustrated and flustered some folks, and I respect him for it. At the end of the day, I very much respect him for it.
Well, I talked to him on the phone a little while ago, and not today, recently. And we just, having common enemies brings people together. And not that it's enemies, but major critics.
Yes.
And we were talking about, he's like, they just banned me from the Emerald Forum. And I said, well, there's talk, people say you're destroying the market and all kinds of stuff. He's like, Amy, those people should know by now, I make markets, not destroy markets. So that was powerful because it's true. And he's written books and done so much for the industry. It's hard to see how people can't give him a little, many people do, but even just that small click can't give him credit for his amazing work.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's also this idea or ideology that, he's one of the big guys, so he doesn't think about anything else, and like all he cares about
he
is
loves those snakes. He sits in there.
Yes, I've watched him do it.
Someone put on the comment, I bet he only glances at those snakes once a week, if even that. And I didn't reply anything, but of course I'm thinking you should see my phone. I can imagine what his phone looks like, what he sends.
I like Kevin is a reptile nut. Like
he is a reptile
sense.
Nerd.
Yeah, literally. And I wish more people got that about him 100%, because he really, like, he just cares about the animals, and he's done things for so long and made so many pushes forward for the industry and done things his own way. Like, sure, have things in the industry changed as technology becomes available and all this stuff, and might he be a little slow to the come up of things? Sure. I think if you were to look at a lot of the folks that have been around for that long, you could say the same, myself included. So I think people just really need to pay attention to, like, okay, I don't have to agree with that, but he's still the guy that's done XYZ. Like, I got to give him some props. I got to give him some credit. And,
at least be interested to see what he comes up with. I mean, at the very least.
Yeah, 100%. He was blowing me up when Rich over at Reptile Basics started sending him the new enclosures for the emeralds and stuff that he's got now. And I'm very lucky. Reptile Basics isn't very far from me, so I had gone to see Rich, and he showed me some of those cages because I hadn't seen them in person. I had already left by the time he had gotten them. So it was the first time I got to see them in person. I was very impressed and had called him on the phone on my way home. I was like, dude, I finally saw those cages in person, man. And good work. Cause that's a great looking enclosure, and I appreciate the fact that he's constantly innovating and trying to push things forward, and his brain doesn't shut off, even when he sleeps. So.
And I see Tim said that you can't scoff at anyone who's done a talk show with Steve Irwin. So for those of you who don't know who Kevin is, you're obviously not a reptile person. But if you don't, like Tim said, he's done talks with Steve Irwin. So yes, he's somebody, not just in the reptile world, but in the animal world altogether.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, it's incredible that you got to work with those guys. Just seriously insane.
Yeah, like I said, I consider myself very, very, very blessed. And to the point, I wanted to mention this earlier, the fact that you just learned about morphs 4 years ago. I cannot imagine trying to get into the morph game or understand the morph game now. There's so much more that has been discovered in the last 15 years than when I first started looking at ball pythons. The Inferno ball python, as we call it, which was the first 4-gene stacked ball python that I think was ever produced, if I remember correctly. That was like the bee's knees in the early 2000s, and I remember being able to see that and see the building blocks from that point up. So it was like every year we'd see maybe 3 or 4 new mutations that would pop up, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. I can look at this. I can see it. I'm not overwhelmed by 2 or 3 a year. Now it's like, oh yeah, here's 500 ball python mutations, and here's all the thousands of different combinations that are made therein. I cannot fathom that. So yeah, anybody out there trying to understand reptile mutations right now, in particular for ball pythons, kudos to you, and I don't envy your struggle.
Well, I wonder, something I have thought about a couple times but never expressed it. I know that there's the difference between a locality and a morph. A locality is something you find in nature,
Mm-hmm.
and a morph is something that's man-made, basically.
Kind of, yeah. So with locality variances, there's usually some kind of natural reason for that variance, right? For whatever the reason may be. Maybe, a certain, like if we look at like the black dragon Asian water monitor, that's a very specific population that we think it is a morph by definition. It's something genetic that's replicable every generation, but it's found in one locality of water monitors, and there are various reasons for that, whether it be camouflage based or maybe it's a more densely covered region, so they need to be able to absorb heat more, and obviously darker color absorbs more heat, those things, versus a mutation in how we think about like ball pythons, where it's a spontaneous development that's reproducible, that could go on in the wild, but in certain instances also can be detrimental if it's in the wild. Like if we think again about albinism, normally an albino animal is not going to survive to adulthood.
A quick comment or a quick fact, interesting thing is that in Colombia, I learned that you are not allowed to have pythons, but you can get a license to have an albino python because it couldn't survive out there.
That's interesting, but it
Yeah.
makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. There's actually a couple states, I think Tennessee might be one of them, where you're not allowed to have corn snakes because they're a native species, but you can have mutations of corn snakes. But they have to all be derivative of albino, so they have to have red eyes. So it's very interesting, and it all goes back to that, because like they can't survive well in the wild, and also they don't want that stuff like intermingling with wild populations.
Yeah, the Everglades python situation happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What, we were in the middle of something and I interrupted you. We were talking about albino as morphs and localities.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up to this.
Yes, yeah. So
Question.
if we look at something like a pinstripe ball python, that's that would be considered a morph. It's a one-off thing. It's reproducible, but you could supposedly argue that animal would still survive in the wild because it's brown and black, but it's a much brighter looking animal, so it would stand out a bit more. So something like that is something that wouldn't really survive in the wild. So the stacking of the mutations is 100% dictated by man. The chances of you going out in the wild to find a coral glow pinstripe spider just slithering around West Africa, not going to happen.
Right. So we're just taking genes that exist and creating a different odds of reproducing that gene.
Exactly. Yeah.
So my question that led me to ask that question is wondering about the emerald tree boas.
Mm-hmm.
We have localities, we don't have morphs, but we have people creating, just like you said, animals that you might find some of their characteristics in the wild, but definitely not mixed. So at what point would those become morphs?
So I think when we start looking at that, we start talking about polygenetic traits. So these are things that might be more locality specific, or things that we might see in a specific animal that we'd like to enhance. So if I think about something like The leopard geckos are really complex, but think about something like a corn snake, and we look at the coral gene or the red factor gene, and it originally was a snake. I think it was found in snows that expressed a bit of pink in the coloration. Not a lot, just was like, oh, it doesn't quite look as clean white as all the other ones. It's got this pink tinge to it, and I kind of like that. So that animal was held back, bred back into the parent that produced it of the opposite sex, and we produced more pink offspring from that. So that essentially gets outcrossed and then bred back and outcrossed and bred back. And now we have some corn snakes, some snow corn snakes that are just freaking fluorescent pink, like wild. But you could easily dilute it if you took that and bred that to an animal that doesn't come from a lineage of that trait. So I think that's where things get a little bit more head scratchy when we start looking at those things. Like I would think with emeralds, something would be like the amount of white that we start seeing on some of the animals, or a specific look to the white. If we have more of a singular line down the back of like a basin versus more of the barbed wire kind of look. I'm sure
diamonds, snowflakes, aliens,
right, all of that. So
all
I think
by Ed
if
Marino.
you were able to kind of isolate a specific trait that you like within that, like maybe if we're looking at like a barbed wire animal, like I really like this look. If you can get your hands on another barbed wire looking animal, you'd probably want to breed those together to see what intensity you could take that to. And if you don't have access to that, then you're going to see a dilution of that polygenetic trait. So I think that's where it'll never be necessarily a true morph because it's not immediately replicable. But it is something that with time can become more isolated and dialed in, that even if you were to outcross it, let's say 5 or 6 generations in, you're now outcrossing to something totally different. There's still going to be the influence of that appearance that you are more interested in pursuing.
So we just keep calling them designer emeralds then.
Yeah, pretty much.
Arachnid Cat wanted to, and Arachnid Cat, hi. We met one time, and I actually made some videos for her in Colombia. I learned how to get tarantulas to come out of their holes, and I didn't know
that's
Arachnid
really cool.
Cat, but Dave was telling me about her, so I made her videos. I've never sent them. But Arachnid Cat wants to know more about the spider gene. She was interested in that.
So the spider gene, see if I remember the whole story correctly. So the spider gene was an imported animal that was found at a pet shop in California. So it was originally in the wild. It was imported into a pet shop in California. And Lindy from Freedom Breeder, who Lindy and Kevin were very tight in the early years of Nerd. Lindy saw it, sent images to Kevin. Kevin was like, we got to get it. Lindy got it, sent it to Kevin, and that's the spider gene. As a whole, originally it was called the spider web because it looks like a spider web, and that just got shortened to spider. But yeah, and it's the gene everybody loves to hate, and I think it's not fully merited.
Tell us why.
So they have the wobble. Everybody freaks out about the spider wobble. And we've figured out basically it's impaired. Basically, it can't keep its head straight, and oftentimes will kind of go off in a certain direction. Sometimes they'll kind of do a little loop-de-loo. And we've since in more recent years found that it's an improper formation of the inner ear bone. So it's not a neurological issue as it's been described by so many people time and time again, but it's an improperly formed inner ear bone. So it's basically essentially like vertigo. So I think this particular gene gets a lot of hate. Back in the day, when I got my first spider ball python, I paid a lot of money for it at the time. The debate on spider was very cut and dry. It was I like the spider gene. The wobble doesn't seem to impair the animal. I don't mind it. I think it's a cool gene. And the other side was I don't like the fact that it wobbles, so I just avoid it. And that was pretty much it. It wasn't until this is probably like 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago now. The IHS, I think it was over in Europe, had talked about banning the sale of spider combo ball pythons at their reptile shows, the shows they hosted, as well as some other mutations that have been known to have deformities, such as like the super cinnamon ball python that has kind of like a duck bill jaw, just animals that for some reason are not perfect. And Brian Barczyk made a video kind of explaining or expressing how he didn't totally agree with that, because you could argue that no mutation is perfect if we were to compare it to the normal wild type animal. Every mutation has the potential to carry some deformity. Heck, albino ball pythons were so heavily line bred and inbred, they have a higher propensity when bred to each other, albino to albino, to produce animals that have no eyes, or jaw malformations. So basically made a video talking about how this could be a slippery slope. And, if you don't like the gene, don't work with the gene. It's as simple as that. And the industry overall, over the 20 or so years that I've been around, is usually very good at policing itself. When we find out that there's a gene that has serious health concerns or health risks for an animal, we back off of it. A great example in ball pythons is the desert gene. Females will ovulate and then die. They do not lay eggs. That gene is rarely, males can breed fine, but the females do not breed. If they breed and ovulate, they die. That's just as far as it goes. So that gene is rarely ever seen or worked with. The couple of people that still work with them just happen to have a couple of males, and they are typically sold as pet only animals, not for breeding, specifically for those reasons. So I think the spider ball gets all this extra hate. And then, so Brian makes this video. There's another YouTuber, who I forgot who their name was, but they made a video because, when Brian makes a video on something like that, that's controversial, it really was blowing up. So somebody jumped on the bandwagon of that and said, well, I think Brian's wrong. This gene is terrible. And it blew up because he made it and put it out at the right time, and it blew up, and it made everybody in social media land be like, yeah, if you breed spider balls, you are the scum of the earth. And Kevin jumped in and made a video, and he's like, well, I'm the guy that, pioneered the project. Let me put my 2 cents in here. Unfortunately, by that time, the damage had already been done. And people just looked at Kevin like, well, you're a piece of crap because you saw that first snake wobbled and you didn't care. And you didn't just leave it alone. So the problem that I have when it comes to the debate on the spider ball is there are other genes that exist within that same complex. Champagne, hidden gene woma, arguably blackhead. And they wobble. It's far less intense than what we see with the spider ball, but they still wobble. The super spot nose wobbles just as bad as a spider, but it thrives. They eat well. They do very well. I've seen thousands of spider and spider combo ball pythons, and I don't think I've seen a single one wobble to the point where it impacted the health of the animal. On the flip side of that, there are genes in other species, such as the jaguar carpet python and jaguar reticulated python, that wobble tremendously. And I've witnessed in a far smaller number of offspring a failure to thrive in those extreme wobble cases. Those are both genes that you typically do not see get bred in those communities anymore. Occasionally somebody still does, and the argument is it's along the same lines of what's going on with the spider and spider complex animal. It's a malformation of that inner ear bone. And with those 2 species, it just seems to be very severe. But people are saying that they've been able to breed for less of that impact. So maybe there's an animal that in some outcross world has been able to be bred with less intense of those issues. For me personally, I've worked with jaguar carpet pythons personally and in other collections. I think they're beautiful snakes. I've seen some that barely wobble, and I've seen some that can't keep their head right to save their life. It's not worth it to reproduce those, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I'm not dogging on anybody that does at
Right.
all, but for me, I don't think that that's worth it when I've seen, and again, a smaller sample size, more of a failure to thrive than I have ever seen in thousands of spider ball pythons and spider ball combos. But those other snakes, because they are not as popular as spider ball pythons have been, don't get any of that negative attention on the same scale, and it bothers the crap out of me.
Mhm.
We can look at leopard geckos. Leopard geckos had the Enigma, which was kind of like the same thing. They just kind of spin in circles, and they're really largely unable to eat. There are a couple of lines that have been outcrossed and stuff where it seems like that's no longer an issue, which is great. And then another one in the leopard gecko land was the lemon frost. The lemon frost gene is a beautiful gene, but it is tied to cancer. So these animals inevitably develop tumors and fail to thrive. Nobody's working with them anymore.
Mm.
Like, going back to this, we're very good at policing ourselves when we know, hey, this is, for those first few lemon frosts, it was, hey, my animal's starting to do this, and I'm taking it to the vet, and oh man, it's cancer. Like, is yours doing that? No, I don't see that. 2 months later, oh man, it's starting to develop too. This is a problem. And it's okay, well, maybe it's coming from our bloodline. Let's try, there's trial and error that goes into seeing, is this a real issue? Is it a one-off? What's going on? And once we realize, no, this is tied to the mutation, this is no good, back off. The industry is very, very good at figuring that out and realizing it's not good.
So is line breeding what's responsible for these mutations, or just the mixing of certain genes?
No, it's just the mixing of certain things. So like with the spider ball, coming in, the original spider ball had the wobble. So it's just something that's tied to that gene. Same thing for the jags, with the carpets and retics. Same thing with the Enigma. It's just attached to that gene, which goes back to the original point that Brian had made in his video about what the IHS in Europe was trying to do. Was any mutation could be argued to not be perfect. We don't know, to your point earlier about saying, like, this industry has not been around that long. Importing animals has not been around for 100 years. We're still learning some of the impacts that these genes may have with certain animals. And again, because we've perpetuated the business side of working with these animals so heavily, there are things we might not ever really realize because these animals are changing hands so quickly. you know it's impossible to know, and you can parallel that with, there have been many mutations that have been around, 30 years or so now, that we know are very solid. We've produced enough, we've seen enough reach adulthood maturity, and they thrive, they're fine. But you can always argue that point that no mutation is perfect. So when you start talking about, well, this and this and this, if you want to get that nitpicky, it can send you down a whole bunch of tangents. If you can go down the tangent of egg cutting, which we see a lot with python species, larger python species. People will argue that cutting a snake egg is increasing the chance for odds of a snake that might not have come out of that egg because it had some sort of internal failure, genetic failure. So you're increasing the risk of that lineage being brought into the industry and spreading and whatever. So you could argue that point all day long. That being said, I cut snake eggs. I'm very specific and methodical when I do it, and I've never had any issues. But other people may have. So you could there's this is the terrible cliche, but it holds true here. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Like, you can do this a bunch of different ways and still be successful at it. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. And when you start mixing ethics into the conversation, then everything gets blown, to a million ways out of proportion, because even ethics is based on a per person basis.
Subjective, yes.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a whole tangent to go on for sure.
Well, I just had a long conversation with Jeremy Moore this morning. A lot of people don't know who he is because he's a a silent person, but he's one of the OGs of emerald importing. And we were just talking about the importance of trying to normalize saying, if that's working for you, that's fabulous. Keep up the good work. Instead of, people trying to change everything other people are doing when things are working great for them.
Right.
So yes, I love
100%.
that take.
100%. And I think it's an element of what we do that often gets overlooked or misinterpreted. And, I think a great example of that as well is chondros. And if you look at something like Rico Walder, rest in peace, but was the man at breeding chondros. And it also largely had to do with where he lived. He lived in the mountains of Colorado. Like, it was as close to replicating their natural environment as possible, with barometric pressure shifts and all these other things going on that you weren't getting if you're living in Florida, or Southern California or Massachusetts somewhere. You weren't getting those same shifts. You weren't getting those same pressure changes and stuff. That plays a part in it too. How you have your room set up, or, did you build it specifically for your reptiles, or is it something that it was a spare room in the house and you just decided to start putting cages in there one day? All of these things play a part in how you should be taking care of and maintaining your animals long term. But we rarely ever discuss that. It's one of the reasons why, like, I refuse to ever put out this is a best of blank. Like, this is the best substrate to use. This is the best this to use. This, based on my opinion, maybe, but I'll never put out a video like that because I wouldn't want somebody to take my advice full bore and be like, okay, he said it was the best, and then they have a bad experience with it, and then look at me and be like, well, he said this was the best, and now I'm failing here. Like, what's going on? Because there's so many other variables. I will certainly give you my opinion on a piece of husbandry equipment, or, a bedding or something like that, based on my experience. But, like, I don't want to perpetuate that stereotype of this is the best because I said so, and, somebody maybe paid me money to make this video. I don't want. I'm not interested in that. I'll tell you what works for me. I'll tell you where I'm at and why I think it works for me. And if you tell me where you're at, I'll give you ideas or examples of what I think might work the best for you based on your situation.
Yes, that is definitely a take that we could do well to spread throughout the communities, not just reptiles, anything, all of it. Life in general.
I agree.
Well, you guys, Chris is going to give us our sponsor video, and we are going to come back. Jeremy, don't leave us.
Sweet.
And we're going to hear about your Amazon tree boas, which I'm interested in because I work with those in the wild as well as the emeralds.
Yes.
And another thing real quick is Rico was an emerald guy too, and he traveled to the jungle and did research on emeralds. And when I first wanted to get down to the nitty gritty of how to take care of these animals, it was Rico's name that kept coming up. And I wanted to talk to him so bad. And then I learned that he wasn't with us anymore.
Right.
So who's to say if Rico had been with us still, would I have just got to talk to someone who did it, or would I have gone and done it myself? So Rico, in his passing, inspired me to go do what I've done. So I just wanted to say that about Rico since you brought him up.
Heck yeah.
All right, Chris, if you're ready, we're ready. And when we come back, we'll not only talk about the Amazon tree boas, but also about the diversity of your collection. We're really interested to know what all you have. Chris.
Lights come on, pulse in the air, we unite. Cold-blooded, got 5 feet in the night. Cold-blooded, caffeine, fueling the fight. Reptile crew, got our backs tight. Thank you for keeping us all. CMB reptiles, rolling with soul. Hold no stop, lifting our goal. Together we burn like burning coal. Elevate, more fries in the show. Irresistible pythons letting it flow. Battery crew, yeah, we watch them go. Indigo, Reptile Co, set the glow. Shut up feeders, we're shut out feeders. Under the rock, we're cold-blooded hitters. Ship your reptiles, make life better. South Bay reptiles, through every weather. Blue tongue, shaman, blue tongue republic. Arc adventures, riding republic. No fakes, no breaks, we're here to publish. Taking it higher, dreams embellished. Sponsors love through beats, we rise. Show it thanks met under the skies.
That made me feel like I had the wobble. Great beat, Chris. I like your new video. The new sponsor video rocks. Thank you. All right. Well, we have Amazon tree boas. For those of you guys who follow me and you've seen my trips to the jungle, they're the little colorful snakes you always see us holding. And you guys, some of you know that I do, intercept the exportation process and try to take the animals back out to the wild. And so when you see me with the little colorful Amazon tree boas, that's because we're only rescuing the colorful ones, because the regular ones, I used to call them leopard, but then I was told there's a real leopard one, and I can't just call normal ones leopard. So, and they are, another thing from me before Jeremy goes on, because he's going to tell us all about them, is when I take guests to the jungle, we hold all the emeralds, the wild emeralds, we hold them, we take pictures with them in our face, the whole thing. And then very last of all the snakes we're going to hold is going to be the Amazon tree boas, because otherwise all your pictures will have blood in them, because those things, they are very snappy, and in the wild you can tame some of those snakes, especially emeralds and rainbows. But the Amazons at first are always going to be bitey. All right, that's all I have to say. You go.
I love that. Oh man. Yeah, so the Amazon tree boa thing for me, I got my first pair. I was still living with my parents. I was still in my teens, and I didn't know what I was doing. And back then they were all still on the pet shop list. They were still called Cook's tree boas.
That's what we call it in Suriname.
Yeah. So
real quick, before you go on about this, give us a quick transition, because tell us a real briefing about your regular husbandry you had with your other snakes, because this is a completely different level. So just give us a quick visual of that.
Yeah, so you mean as far as like how I've kept everything else versus going into the Amazon stuff?
Just real quick about how you had to really concentrate on arboreal needs over the terrestrial needs.
Yeah, 100%. So, I largely kept colubrids, U.S. native colubrids, so king snakes and milk snakes, and of course ball pythons and leopard geckos and things that existed on the ground. So coming into arboreal land, obviously I knew I needed a taller cage, but early on really had to learn about the parameters of dealing with arboreal snakes. It's a bit different when you're looking at something terrestrial. It's like, okay, hot spot, cool spot, put a hide box over there, there's your water bowl, we got to figure it out, like we're good to go. It's very cut and dry in that regard, versus an arboreal animal that's obviously they're going to want a basking spot and then a cool spot to be able to hide. But now we've added this element of height and being able to get access to heat in different ranges and in cooler temperatures in different ranges. And also having a water bowl in the ground isn't always going to be helpful, so understanding misting frequencies, integrating mist systems, and how to navigate that, as well as working on humidity, because obviously a bigger, taller enclosure is a little bit harder to mitigate those situations as well, especially when you have something like an Amazon that needs that moderate humidity, 50 to 70% at a really consistent basis, versus that ball python that's going to tolerate the dry season a lot better. If you go away for a week, it's not mad that you didn't spray it in the face with some water. It's probably a little happy, or versus colubrids that really don't need that much spraying at all. You give them a little moist hide with some moss and they're pretty much good to go. They don't need the spraying as much. So it was a very big switch.
And your heat element and screen tops were normal.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So then you go into something where you're like, okay, humidity is evaporating quickly with a heat bulb and an open air screen top. So how do we figure this out? Income radiant heat panels, income LED lights, PVC enclosures, plastic enclosures. Exactly. Yeah. The jungle, literally bringing the jungle into an enclosure, like how do we really create that? So Amazons were, so I've kept carpet pythons for a long time, which are almost an in between. They're semi-arboreal snake, but
Mm.
comes to husbandry parameters are much more forgiving because in Australia, obviously it's going to rain, it's going to get wet, but it's going to be really hot and dry. So they can tolerate a lot of those variations in their parameters and be okay. Obviously they have that sweet spot, but again, nature's not always in that sweet spot. So they can tolerate it a lot better. Versus starting to work with Amazons where it's like, okay, they have a very wide range and can handle a wide array of parameters within a very narrow gap in comparison to the carpets and some of the other snake species. So that was my first real take at figuring this out. And at the time I was experimenting with a different cage, very similar to the vision cages. They were called showcase cages. So same kind of like plastic molded, single piece plastic mold cage, having a spot for an over the top basking bulb and a spot for a UV bulb. But I still battled with humidity parameters. I was able to dial in temperature pretty well, and I think largely because I had a snake room, so ambient temperature was already kind of dialed into a good spot. So it was just about providing a specific basking area with a higher temp that they could go after feeding. So that was easier, but humidity was still eluding me. So I spent many a time with one of those pump sprayers just dousing an enclosure to try to figure it out. At that time I didn't have access to a hose or anything like that in my reptile room to make things easier, and didn't really know that misting systems were a thing.
Probably weren't.
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, so Amazons were definitely like that step up. So my first pair, I didn't really know what I was doing. All I knew was I had this snake that I thought was cool. It was just a gray brown pair of snakes, and I thought they were cool. My mom hated them because they bit everything, and I was bleeding all the time.
Yeah.
And then the second pair that I had gotten, so this is probably I was like 15 or 16 years old. I experimented more with a tub setup, just a larger tub setup. So the trick at that point was realizing, okay, belly heat doesn't work. This animal's not going to be on the ground that much. Granted, Amazons are on the ground more than most of the other Corrales, but not enough to be comfortable for me to be comfortable with giving them the appropriate parameters. The tub worked a lot better for humidity purposes. I could really control that airflow a lot better. But still was just trying to figure out husbandry parameters versus anything else. I tried to breed that second pair. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, did not have success, and just was losing a lot of blood. So inevitably didn't really pursue Amazons at that time. It was just kind of like dipping my toe in the water of the arboreal land. And I had jumped into keeping chondros. I had a couple of green tree pythons and had a lot more success with them than I did with the Amazons. And I bred them once, was unsuccessful. My female had slugged out. And of course, when that's your first experience working with something or breeding something, you're like, I'm a little not interested right now in pursuing this anymore. But I enjoyed working with the arboreal stuff and enjoyed the fact that it was a challenge. I not to say that I had everything that I was working with dialed in, but I had kind of figured out the formula for a lot of the terrestrial stuff where it was like, okay, I can make little tweaks along the way, but we're going to be able to maneuver through them very easily. So fast forward to, man, I don't know how many years ago it was now, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I was at Northeast Carpet Fest with my buddy Eric and Owen, NPR. They had a US Arc auction, and Keith McPeak had brought an Amazon tree boa that he had produced. And I was like, man, it's a really pretty Amazon. I hadn't really seen one with those colors. It's just a really nice, like orange bicolory looking animal. And I was like, man, that's cool. You know what? And obviously I support US Arc. So I was like, yeah, I'll bid on it. And ended up winning it. And, cool. I'm like, I remember bleeding the last time I had these. We're going to see what's going on. And I was very surprised that this animal was very tractable. I could handle it without really getting bitten at all. And was like, oh, things have changed. I'm very happy about that. And I just kind of had it set up. It was young, so I had it in a rack system, and just kind of let it grow up. And by this time, I've been working with more arboreal animals and other people's collections and stuff, so I had a bit better of an idea of how to maintain this animal. And I just fell in love with him. I was like, okay, this snake is kind of changing my feeling on Amazons. And then I started doing a little bit more research and went down that rabbit hole and started to see the red calicos and the tigers and all that stuff. I was like, holy crap, like this is not at all what I saw all those years back when I was a kid. What is going on? And I was basically in hook, line, and sinker at that point. I was like, these animals are beautiful. And I started seeing some of the captive bred animals where people had really focused on taking a bicolor animal that, traditionally tends to have a lot of black speckling all through it, and line breeding to get animals that had reduced amounts of black speckling on them. So it was just a solid orange and yellow snake. And I was like, whoa, that's wild. Like I couldn't imagine anything like that. So got access to some import folks thanks to working at Nerd, and periodically would get messages once they figured out that I liked certain things. They would send me direct messages to be like, hey, we know you like these tree boas. Check out this one that just came in if you're interested. And of course, I've got the bug now. So I'm like, yeah, that one's neat. Send it on over. So it was a whirlwind of like, okay, now I've kind of got this one dialed in. Let me get a couple more and kind of experiment and see on some kind of scale outside of just a singular animal, and was able to dial them in. I had spent a bit more time working with rack systems, and these were all predominantly younger animals. So they fit in these 15 to 20 quart bins that had some height, had some length and width. So I could set up some kind of decent enclosure where I felt that they would be comfortable, and they seemed to thrive. So I was like, okay, cool. We're figuring this out. We're dialing this in. And then I started to investigate more about their behavior, and I started kind of paying more attention to them. I was like, okay, this rack system thing is kind of working for them. And I've seen people keep them in more terrestrial-esque setups because they will spend a lot of time on the ground versus a lot of the other corrales. So I'm like, okay, maybe a rack system is the way to go. Because I can kind of work a little bit of both worlds if I get the right size enclosure. So I had an FB80 rack, an old school FB80 rack, which was basically a CB70 drawer, what we see for ball pythons, so 33 inches deep by 16 and a quarter inches wide. But now I had 9 inches of height instead of 4.5 inches of height. So, a whole 9 inches, so you're probably like, we're an arboreal snake. Yeah. It's like, oh, we're going big time now. But what it allowed me to do was I was able to take a plastic corrugated tube, like a drainage tube, cut it into sections, and I utilized that. I zip tied it to the side of the tub. So drilled some holes through the tub and basically made it an arboreal hide, just something that was off the ground. And I was like, okay, I want to see how the animal kind of utilizes this. And that was my first glimpse. This tub also had a clear plexiglass front. So I'm like, now I can kind of see what the snake is doing, and I can see, okay, they're really utilizing this, and they're starting to utilize this. So it's starting to get my brain kind of turning a little bit. And now I'm like, okay, the rack system's got them dialed in. I've got access to a hose, so we're able to really increase the humidity. We're dialing these guys in. I'm loving this. And I'm like, oh, well, there's a pretty one over there on that person's table. I think I'm going to go grab that, and we're going to see that. And I quickly amassed a collection of probably like 15, and was like, all right, I think this is good. We're going to start with this and see what's going on. And fast forward to moving to North Carolina, I still had them set up in the rack style enclosure, and I was enjoying that. And then I was like, man, I kind of really want to see them in a cage and see what that is going to look like instead. But obviously with the number that I had, I had to be really specific about cage size. So I couldn't go huge, elaborate enclosure. So I went with like 18-inch cubes and 24-inch cubes. And I was like, okay, let's kind of get some bearings here. These are young adult animals, so I don't need massive enclosure, but I need something with some size and space. That was when everything switched for me. And watching them utilize an enclosure where we've got radiant heat panel, so we've got heat, and then we've got LED light. So I've got a photo period on them now. They have this whole range. I did the same corrugated plastic tube, elevated hide. Now I can get branches in there. Now I can get, cork flats on the bottom so they can go hide under that. And then as soon as I got them into there, it was almost immediate. I'm watching the day-by-day behavior. I go downstairs at 9 a.m. The lights turn on. They're sitting right under that radiant heat panel, getting that warmth for the day. Then midday, they're in the corrugated tube on the cooler side, just chilling. And then they start to go down and they're under the cork flat by midday. And then as soon as the lights go off, 5 minutes, they're out, they're cruising. And I'm like, oh man, this is awesome. And I'm watching it every day. It's the routine. It's the habit of the snake. And I've got, 10 cages stacked up. So I'm watching these just Amazon basically doing the same thing. And I'm like, oh man, this is freaking awesome.
Beautiful.
Man. Like, I'm loving it. Then I'm like, okay, well, now I want to kind of play with, get some plants in here. And, the LED lights aren't amazing for growing plants, but giving some kind of photo period still works. So I got something simple. I got some pothos and was like, let's just start. Let's see where this is going to go towards. And I'm like, man, I'm loving this. I love being able to see them. And now I'm getting really bit by the bug of I love Amazons, and I'm starting to showcase them a little bit more. And I don't mind being bitten. I hate being bitten, but I don't mind it. So I'm willing to handle them. And I'm
those
putting
aren't
in that
bad. They
time.
don't leave a mark. The next day, there's nothing. There's just a little blood right now.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, it's I'm like, this is manageable. It's fine. And I'm like, man, these animals are just great. And I start showcasing some of the nice red ones that I had, and people are like, whoa, like that's a really impressive snake. And you're holding it. Like, what's going on? And the wheels started turning for me on, I like species that kind of have that bad rap, and I like being able to kind of change people's perception on that. I worked with blood pythons and short-tail pythons largely because of that. But something about the Amazons just kept me coming back and coming back and coming back. And I was hooked. So now I'm like, okay, sales of ball pythons in particular, because that's what a large portion of my collection was, had slowed. I had all these inquiries on Amazon tree boas, and then I produced my first couple of litters and watched people just like lose their mind and just be like, I need that, I want that, when is this available? And so business wise kind of got my brain moving a little bit on like, well, maybe this is a cool species to kind of bring to the forefront in the hobby. Something that while there are people that breed them in captivity and have for a long time, they're still largely imported. And a lot of times people's first experience with them is an imported animal. And if you don't have those parameters dialed in correctly, you have a bad experience. Tie that in with an animal that's generally very defensive, you're probably never going to want to own one ever again. If
and highly likely imported.
Yeah, exactly.
So all that trauma too, all of it together.
100%. Yeah. So I'm like, man, maybe this is kind of the direction to go to. So I start investigating a little bit more, start talking with people. My first litter from my really high white calico male Carnage, that litter was largely male, was basically all male. So I ended up trading a lot of those males out to other Amazon guys. And swapping, getting new captive bred blood into my collection, which is what I wanted. I was very happy to establish some great imported animals and get them thriving and doing well. That was wonderful. But I didn't want to continuously be dealing with the woes of imported snakes. So my goal was to kind of establish a good little foundational group of imports, and then slowly make way for captive bred animals, either by trading with other breeders or just producing my own babies and raising those up. And that first high white calico litter really gave me the pushes to do that. So fast forward to now realizing, or I should say fast forward to about a year and a half ago when I said to myself, okay, I think Amazon's is where I'm going to pivot my business to, because now on a personal level, from the keeper level, I love these freaking snakes. I think they're the coolest freaking snakes in the world. I want to talk about them all the time. To people who have no idea what a garter snake is, I'm like, look at this tree boa from South America. Like, this is the coolest thing. So, and I'm like, from a business side, very rarely do I ever have any that I need to post publicly. So I highlight stuff on my website and I highlight stuff on social media, and usually that's enough to where I'm getting an email from some random person that's like, hey, I would love to get an Amazon from this, litter if you happen to have any. So from a business mindset, I was like, well, this is potentially some really untapped space, and it would be great to kind of pave that trail. And I was happy that it was aligning with a species that I genuinely really love. So I was like, this is the best of both worlds. So now I've amassed a collection of about 50 Amazons, and have gotten some caging ideas and rack ideas that are trying to take things to the next step. Understanding, having the collection that I have and still expanding it a little bit, that economically cages get very expensive very quickly. How to mitigate that is a rack system, but how do we take a rack system and take it to that next level to where we're really satisfying the needs of the snake versus my desire to just have a bunch of snakes? And so I've been playing around and toying with Cambro tubs, which Cambro are the big food storage tubs used for caterers and stuff like that. Their extra large tub that's 26 inches deep, 18 inches wide, and 15 inches tall. This is, for me, basically an 18-inch cube that just got flattened and sent back a bit. And I was like,
they're as clear as glass.
And they're as clear as glass. And I love that. So I'm like, this has great opportunity for light, to be able to integrate light into the rack system. So we're getting a photo period in there. We've got some space. So your average sized adult Amazon tree boa is going to be able to fit in here pretty comfortably. Obviously, a massive animal is going to need something larger. I've had some like 6-foot females come in that I'm like, well, you got to get a cage. Like, we're not going to work in anything like that. But your average 4.5 to 5 foot snake, it's still very slender. This tub is kind of like the perfect size. 15 inches of height. Oh my gosh, no, it's not 2 feet, but I've got some elevation. I can get some branches. I can get some cork flats. If I get these 2 corrugated plastic tubes, one on each side, I can get a cork flat going over the cross of them, and I can increase my floor space a little bit. So it started to get my brain working. So I started to build some racks around these tubs with back heat. So we're not worried about the belly heat elements anymore. And the final thing to work through was integrating a misting system into the rack system. So this way we don't have to worry because I still am a working musician and I'm usually on the road 2 to 3 days out of the week. So if I happen to not be home for 2 days back to back, those animals are still going to get misted. They're still going to get hydration, and we're going to be good, and no stuck sheds, because that's just like the worst with tree boas is the stuck sheds. So it's really pushed me in a direction of pushing the envelope in husbandry on a larger scale, which I've genuinely really, really enjoyed. I give a shout out to my podcast sponsor, Black Box Cages, for designing some amazing cages, and then I'll also shout out Rich over at Reptile Basics for working with me to help design a rack system to integrate the misting system element. I've just been toying with the first run of those, and I'm really, really enjoying it. And so again, with these tubs, having that amount of room, I can also get some branches in there. So Amazons, for people who might not know, they don't typically perch like your emerald tree boas. They would rather sit on like a cross section or something flat, unless they're going to be hiding under something. So having spaces where I can put a big cork flat that's elevated, they're going to enjoy that. these corrugated plastic tubes, cutting a long enough section to where they can lay on top of it as well as go inside of it has been really pivotal for them. And being able to put some branches that's kind of forcing them to have to navigate and use their brain. And then integrating lights into the rack system allows me to go back to bringing in plants and having some greenery in there as well, which of course is going to increase air quality and all these things. Amazons have really kind of pushed my thought process of keeping in racks and how we can mitigate that to really satisfy the need of the animal and just have something that genuinely is exciting for the keeper to come in and look at. I would love to have a whole jungle room. I would need a whole jungle house with all these Amazons, so I'm like, all with the goal of satisfying the little kid in me that's like, I want 1,000,000 snakes, but also satisfying a niche within the hobby that is largely underserved with the correct animals. And what I mean by that is like having access to captive bred animals that are going to be well started, that you're going to have far less potential issue with versus a lot of the imports that we see come in that are already stressed, already tormented, probably have a stuck shed on them already. And have just been kind of thrown in a bin in a rack and forgotten about because it's the little bitey twig that nobody wants to deal with. So I love highlighting a lot of these animals. I think out of the 50 or so that I have 3 that want me dead all the time. One of them is a captive bred animal. The other 2 are imports. Every other Amazon I have, I can just go in and pick up and handle. And I think in the last 2 years, I've taken 3 bites. And I'm very happy by that.
Once you get to know them and you read them,
exactly.
they read you, and it just all works out.
Exactly. So they have really pushed my understanding of husbandry and keeping in the traditional way, pushing that boundary to say, okay, well, we can keep them like that. Or if we take a little bit of extra time and invest a little bit of extra money, we can really provide the animals with something that's going to truly do right by them if we're going to keep them in some sort of number. So the goal, and I've talked about this on my social media and on some other podcasts, the goal is I've got about 50 Amazons right now. I'd like to get to about 75, which is a lot of Amazons for sure. But the reason behind that is I'd like to have about 25 males and 50 females. And with Amazons, as with a lot of other boas in particular, they don't do well breeding year after year after year after year. It takes a large toll on your females. Your males, they're pretty much okay. They can recover and bounce back without
Try
much
to stop them.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, they're ready to go. But those females really do need that time off. I don't want to necessarily have to sacrifice the offspring potential. But I certainly don't want to decrease the quality of life for my females. So by having basically a 1-to-1 setup for breeding, each year I can always be pairing up to 25 females. I very rarely would anticipate all 25 actually successfully producing, but having that flexibility and ability means each year I can have the potential for 25 litters. Satisfies my desire for certain projects and things that I would like to push forward with the species genetically and in the captive world, but also allows me to give those animals time off and not be pressured to push them hard for something that at that point just becomes truly selfish. And greedy in that business mindset. So here I can mitigate both of those things. I'm lucky to have the room to be able to do so. So I'm like, let's go for it. And in doing this, I'm also working to secure that even if I have 10 litters, if I have 10 litters of 10 babies, that's 100 baby Amazons. That's a lot of baby Amazons. If I can have 100 people have an Amazon tree boa that's captive bred, incredibly well started, feeding on defrosted rodents with no issues, and it's just going to come to you and be very robust, and it's basically going to be plug and play, have your parameters correct, and you're good to go. That to me satisfies a niche in the industry that's incredibly underserved because these animals have such a bad reputation. So that's kind of become my goal. I love the species. I love all the colors in the species. They look wonderful. I don't care if it's a gray Amazon tree boa. I love it just as much as I do my red calico tiger, blah, 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 whatever's. But I want people to just enjoy the snake. And the other element in having that large of a number is I can also kind of hit all of the phenotypic elements within the species. So I can reach
What is
every person.
phenotypic?
So phenotypic, just all the different colors that
Mm-hmm.
they come in. So if you like the gray and the dark coloration, I can have, a couple litters of those for you. If you like the yellows and the bicolors, I can have some of those for you. If you like those screaming reds, I can have some of those for you as well, and be able to do that regardless of which group of females is breeding every year. Really allows me to hit the biggest element of the market as possible. So that was the business side thinking going into actually pivoting the business into this direction. But fundamentally from the keeper standpoint is I just want to be able to provide people with a quality animal that they're genuinely going to have a good experience with. And that's going to make them either want more or just go on to spread the good word of Corrales to the masses.
Well, I positively love what you're doing. My friend Greg and I are putting together a roundtable right now of different keepers and experts on habitat to talk about how to create a good space for your animal. And Bob Bledsoe
Mhm.
agreed to sit on the table with us, and he was very concerned about the topics that we were talking about, because he said that it sounds like we're trying to push people to think that this way is the best way, and we don't want to shame any keepers who are using tubs and drawers. And
Mhm.
so we've changed it, not changed it, but revised everything to include that yes, you can keep your animals in tubs and drawers if you provide the enrichment and the space. And what everything you're saying is incredible. The way you've taken that Cambrio tub and been able to design the inside of it to increase all of that slither space.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
beautiful.
Thank
Loved.
you.
I'm going to have to look that up. I'm sure you have some pictures on your
I've got,
social
yeah.
media.
So I've just been, I have a couple pictures of some of the original ideas, and now with the new model with the mist system, I'm still tinkering and toying with that. So I haven't publicized it too much, but I will be very soon. Yeah, because I'm so stoked about that for sure.
And I'm sure I've seen a lot more than I realize, because,
Yeah.
I see so much stuff and I see all of your stuff. And oh, I know what I was going to ask you. The Mister system, one of the
Mhm.
things that we had to go back and add later after
Mhm.
a few trips, and I realized how much breeze is actually coming through the jungle. Do you have airflow? And I know your tubs are not sealed, but do you do anything
Right.
for airflow?
So that's the one other element that I'm still tweaking. So the nice thing is I specifically have, especially with all of the animals that I have in the room, I have a lot of air movers in the room. So there's a lot of airflow happening naturally. Of course, not directly onto within the enclosure. But that's the one trick, because with a rack system, you're a little limited because you have to be able to move the tub. And so if you have a fan connected to it, then you've got to have long wires and stuff, and then you run into potential electrical hazards with a mist system. God forbid there's any issues there or something spurts a leak at some point. So navigating that is a little tricky. But the way that I've been able to kind of mitigate that now is just by having a lot of airflow in the room as a whole, which the way that room is set up, there's a cross section where the Amazon enclosures are kind of right in the middle of the cross section, where the two airflows are kind of happening simultaneously. So I use, I think it was a 3/4 inch drill bit to put air holes in those Cambro tubs, and they go all the way around. So there's at least at least 3 holes in the front and 5 holes along the side of each tub on each side as well. And that seems to have allowed there to be a decent ebb and
It sounds
flow.
perfect.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think we're doing pretty good. The one trick that I now have to figure out is the way the mist system is set up, because I'm using a Mist King. The lowest nozzles on there. So I have the reservoir kind of about waist height. So the two lowest drawers on each unit get a little excess drip after the spray system is done. So I have to watch the humidity and the water buildup in those tubs. So that's the next level of figuring it out. So I know they have the zip drip valve to release the pressure on the sprayer. So I have to investigate that a little bit and see if that's something that can help. But overall, I think we're moving in the right direction for those.
It sounds great. I can't wait to get a look at the newest new.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, still continuously tinkering, but yeah, it was great to get to a point where I genuinely felt comfortable with the tubs, because having them. So the first racks that I built myself with the Cambro tubs were very much a bare bones rack system. But it gave me the visual to start looking at, okay, well, this is what I need for this, and this is how I'd like to incorporate this. So now having that kind of full-fledged execution, now I'm looking at the nitty gritty of it all and being like, okay, well, how can we change this? How can we change that? And I will say the access to the mist system in those tubs alone was a huge win. Especially like where I have all of my animals are down in the basement, and while there's been rooms that we have built up that are insulated and work for the reptiles, during the cooler months when the heat's cranking and stuff, we watch those dips in humidities, and I dealt with a lot of stuck shed issues my first time, like going through the seasonal shift with the Amazons. So it really forced me to have to be like, okay, I got to sit here with this hose and spray the crap out of you guys. So now to have that mist system in there, it is a world of difference for sure. And I'm like, it's like the biggest sigh of relief.
Yes. I was fortunate. It was just a short time for us, but first I was spraying, and then I really upgraded to the one with the battery so I could spray. And now all I have to do is fill up the reservoirs now and again.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. I'm so thankful for Mist Kings and all the other mist system brands that exist. You guys are lifesavers.
Yes, absolutely. All kinds of great stuff. And it goes to another point that I always like to talk about is we have our OGs, and they came up with the ways to keep these animals alive. You guys, you're one of them. One of the pioneers of, especially with the arboreals, how to keep them alive. And we can never forget those parameters. But now it's been a while, and we're moving up to the next level of not just keeping them alive, but like you said, observing and studying their behavior and really giving them things to think about and thrive. So I love what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm very, very excited, and I'm happy to push the envelope and also be in a position where, like, when these new rack systems are once I've gotten to a point where I feel like, okay, this is like that perfect iteration, be able to say, to somebody that starts keeping or that wants to have, maybe 5 Amazons, but they really like this rack look, cool. Well, we can make that available for you. We can have this come to market to be the next level of keeping if you're going to utilize it in this way. And for me, that's huge. Whatever having a great animal is of course wonderful, but having great husbandry tools to help you match those parameters that animal needs is everything.
And really, truly reaching the people, like you said, who do want to keep more animals in a rack situation, and not saying no racks, but saying, here, this is how we can make the racks wonderful.
Exactly.
We can all win.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy the most, especially within the Amazon community, is, everybody seems to have like their own version and iteration of how they're keeping and what they're being successful with. And there really isn't a whole lot of backlash or complaining about these things, and that's something that I really, really enjoy, because we see that in almost every other facet of parts of the industry. Is, you post a picture of your enclosure and, well, it's not a 4x2x2, you're terrible, you're not doing this, and blah blah blah. And the one thing I wish that people understood when it came to rack systems, and I won't go on a whole tangent about it, but if you think about a CB70 rack, CB70 tub is 33.5 inches by 16.5 inches by 5 inches. we're very close to a 20-gallon long fish tank, which is about 30 by 12 by 10. It's almost the same footprint. Back in the early 2000s, when we were keeping ball pythons in fish tanks traditionally, that was the minimum recommended size for a ball python, unless you had a massive female. It was a 20-gallon long. So a CB70 rack was essentially a whole rack of 20-gallon longs, just without that height, because ball pythons are supposed to be a terrestrial and subterranean snake species. So to vilify rack systems, because now, and I'll make one minor caveat in there and say, I don't like how ball pythons have gone to smaller tubs. We've forced keeping an extra or throwing an extra tub in each level of the rack for what? Like, why did we have to do that? So I don't necessarily jive with that. I think those racks have their place and are maybe great for young females. But when you have a nice big adult female, it needs to be in at least a CB70 tub to be comfortable. But that's my tangent on that one. So when we start looking at racks, if we understand the whole breakdown of it, it's really not as far-fetched as some folks are making it out to seem. And even those people that are saying, oh, well, they need to be in a 40-gallon breeder. Well, a 40-gallon breeder is 36 by 18 by 5. Or sorry, by 12. So we're still not very far from those same parameters on a CB70 tub. So like, let's really look at it. Now all of a sudden it's a 4x2x2. Now it's moved to a 4x2x2. And it's like, okay, we can do it all. We can do both. If you want it in a 4x2x2, great. That does not need to become the industry standard. What should be the industry standard is making sure that the animal, regardless of what enclosure it's in, has everything that it genuinely needs.
Yeah, because Jeremy,
to thrive.
A 4x2x2, and what do?
Yeah,
2 PVC perches with all that space wasted.
Exactly.
And that is so typical. So let's compare slither surface area over empty space.
Right. Exactly. So it's just like, let's be real when it comes to keeping about what these animals need. And if you're doing your due diligence and you understand your animals and you're listening to your animals, you can really figure it out. This would be a different don't get me started. Yeah, I feel it. I feel it, and it's different when we're talking about things like, amphibian species that really do need a lot of that extra climbing space, and they're going to be jumping around. So you want them to have some kind of range there to be able to hop and leap and do all those wonderful things, versus, again, picking on ball pythons, that snake that's going to be in that hide box. Yes, it's going to come out. It's going to investigate. It's going to do all these wonderful things. But the majority of that 24-hour time span, it is in that hide box. So let's be smart. You can still, I have a friend in Florida, Dr. Stephen Tillis. He has a whole CB70 rack of bioactive ball python enclosures. It's just a CB70 rack. He just put bedding and pothos and cork bark and isopods and springtails, and he did it as a giant middle finger to the people that wanted to friggin' freak out about rack systems. And I was like, you know what? I love that, dude. I love that, because it shows that you can do right by the animal in regardless of how you have the enclosure set up, either be a tank style or a rack system.
Excellent. This is such an excellent conversation going forward with our roundtable.
100%.
You would want to sit on it.
I would be honored to sit on it.
Oh, amazing.
Absolutely.
We'll send you an invitation. I mean, it's
Please.
so along the exact identical lines of what we want to really get the word out there.
Yeah.
And when it first started, and my partner said, I don't even want to talk about tubs. And I was like, no, we can't do that, because we don't want to preach to the choir. We want to bring information to the people who are not already using that information and how
100%.
they can make their space. So it's like one of these moments when you started saying all that you were doing that I got the hair standing up on my neck. So that's why I know you're supposed to be there.
Heck yeah. No, I would love to do it. I would definitely love to do it. And I think
nice.
Coming from having the experiences that I've had from keeping as a kid to working in some of the largest breeding facilities in the country to when I was a kid, I volunteered at my local zoo. And so having the opportunity to work in zoo style enclosures as well, like I've seen it all. I've seen what will work, what won't work. And having all of those experiences has really been incredibly informative for me and allows me to pass a lot of that information on where it's like, I I get a kick of watching people go on the tangent debates of racks versus cages, and they look at a zoo style enclosure as the be all end all, and that's the epitome. And I'm like, yeah, but what you don't know is those same keepers have freedom breeder racks out back, behind the scenes to house
Those
other
are the
animals.
showcase.
Yeah, so and you tell that to people and like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, clearly you've never gone behind the scenes at a zoo, you know and that's okay. That's not it for everybody to see, but you do have to realize like there's a place for everything, and it's just about using the tools that we have appropriately to what they're supposed to be used for.
Excellent. That we need a short of just this part of the conversation. Seriously, it's just incredible. It really does break my heart to see people using so much space with just a couple of perches when you have so many great ideas. Well, let's move on to talk about what all stuff are you keeping?
I definitely have a lot. I don't have as much as I did when I was a kid, but I probably have at least a dozen or so different species here. Obviously, the Amazon tree boas. I also have Corallus ruschenbergeri and Corallus annulatus here as well.
And what are those?
That's the blacktail tree boa and the annulated tree boa.
So does Corallus means an arboreal boa?
So yeah, Corallus is that genus. So emeralds, basins, Amazons, the blacktails, and the annulades, they're all under that Corallus.
What about the rainbow boa?
Those are epicrates.
Mm.
Yeah. So definitely a little different, but
oh yeah, it's something I always forget because I only find rainbows in the trees, but I'm only looking in the trees.
In the tree.
So that's why, and it always
fair.
slips my mind like, oh yeah, they're not arboreal. So
Right.
forget that I said that. I keep going.
You're good. So I've got those. I still have some ball pythons. I have Borneo short-tailed pythons. I have jungle carpet pythons. I have Darwin carpet pythons. I have integrades of those. Corn snakes, California king snakes, San Luis Potosi king snakes, Mexican black king snakes, North Mexican pine snakes, Cape Baja gopher snakes, Western hognose snakes. I'm trying to go through the room and see. I've got some leopard geckos here, some crested geckos, gargoyle geckos, chihuahua geckos. I think that's about everything.
That's such a diverse range of husbandry. How do you manage all the differences?
So the nice thing, when it comes to the colubrids, the vast majority, with the exception of the Honduran milk snakes, they're U.S. native colubrids. So temperature parameters are all pretty much identical. So that's nice. So I have all of those species in one rack system because those parameters are very, very close to each other. So outside of that, those differences are like the milk snakes like to be able to cool down. So when I throw their moist hide in, I put their moist hide more to the front of the enclosure than the back of the enclosure. As I would like for the Cal Kings, they would prefer to be a bit warmer. So I'll put their humid hide towards the back of the enclosure where the heat is. Ball pythons are in their own rack. Short-tail pythons are in their own rack. Carpets all have their own cages. I've got a retic as well. She's just my pet. And
Tim wants you to get another retic.
Who does?
Tim.
Oh, Tim. Yeah. Tim has one of my retics. Tim got a retic from me that was a jerk when it was with me, and Tim got it. He was like, I don't know, man, he's not that bad. And I was like, well, good for you, Tim. Good for frickin' you.
I saw a question earlier too. What is a Morelia asked what a black tail boa looks like?
So a black-tailed tree boa is, it looks like a bland Amazon kind of. They're a brown snake. Obviously, they get a black tail. That's how they get the name, the black-tailed tree boa. And
Are they small like the Amazons?
no, they're huge. So the big animals are like 6.5, 7 foot. So there's a couple different localities. There's the Venezuelan locality, which is what I have. There's also the Costa Rican locality and the Trinidadian locality. And of course, I have the Venezuelans that are notorious for being the biggest jerks ever. And they're very, very keyed in. So like when an Amazon tree boa goes to bite you, it's like a drunk guy trying to punch you. It's slow, it's inaccurate, it's whatever. Black-tailed tree boas are dialed in to heat signature 1,000 times over. So every time I have to deal with those enclosures, I'm inevitably getting bitten. So, but I love them all the same. They're still a wonderful snake, and I have them in part with a project with my friend Ryan Martinez from Zoo Miami in an effort to breed them to actually be able to provide them to zoos, because there's really not many zoological organizations that have true Corallus ruschenbergeri. There's a couple zoos that have enclosures labeled Corallus ruschenbergeri, and they're actually just garden phase Amazon tree boas. So we want to be able to help them and get the correct snakes in those enclosures.
Yes, definitely. And Morelia, I think we're just going to have to Google the black-tailed python, since his camera's stationary, and
yes,
also he can't just go, this is not Tim. He can't just go pick an animal out of the enclosure and hold it for the rest of the show.
Right. Right. It would be a very bloody mess. Oh man. But yeah, they're very, very fun snakes. I love them. But the biggest husbandry parameter struggles, honestly, is humidity. Across the room, especially with having the air movers for that airflow. So it really comes down to enclosure placement. The ball pythons want to be a little bit more humid than the North American colubrids. So they're kind of on the far end of the room. So they're getting some airflow from the air movers, but not nearly as much. Also, the ventilation on the rack is a little more dialed in than a full 100% open vent kind of top. So that keeps the humidity a little better. The carpets and stuff, the carpets can tolerate a lot, so I might give them one really strong spray at the beginning of the week, and that on Sunday or Monday, and that might last them through to Friday and keep that humidity boosted really well. So they might get a strong mist once a week, and if one's going into shed, I might be a little more active on spraying that one. But it really just comes down to really understanding what the animals need, and then being really methodical about both how you're maintaining those enclosures and the placement of the enclosures, given the quirks of the room. I think that's kind of like what we were touching on earlier about where you live and what kind of room you have set up for your animals. Was it specifically designed with reptiles in mind, or was it just the spare room in the house that you decided to put some cages in? Those kind of quirks, once you've dialed that in, and also how many enclosures you're putting in there. More enclosures means more radiated heat, and humidity in each space. So all of those things kind of go in and play into those things. So it honestly just comes with a bit of trial and error, and then a bit of experience on the back end of just knowing what the animals need. So then you just figure out how that works within your room.
Mm-hmm. And all of those lizards eat bugs. So do you raise bugs?
So I do breed dubia roaches. So I have a colony of dubia roaches here, but luckily with the crested and gargoyle geckos, I feed them crickets once a week. The rest of the time during the week, they're getting those powdered meal replacement supplement meals, the rapashi and all that stuff, and they thrive on that stuff, which is wonderful. Which is something we didn't have when I first started keeping them when I was a kid. So it's a nice advancement in reptile.
So you don't have to have live bugs.
You don't have to. You can actually keep cresteds and gargoyles 100% on that.
What about chameleons?
Diet. Chameleons still need the bugs. They won't survive on that diet. So a lot of times the majority of those pre-made diets are based in fruit. because that's what they're also eating as well as the bugs. They're licking up nectars and stuff like that. It plays a big part of their diet. So they're cool with that. But like my Chihuahua gecko that's behind me is more of a bug eater than a nectar eater. So he's got to eat more frequently. He's got insects more frequently than the cresteds and the gargoyles. So that plays into it too. And then all the leopard geckos, they get dubia roaches, and then I will just order mealworms in bulk and just feed them off over time.
Well, you mentioned the dubia roaches, which I would have called a Dubai roach.
My autocorrect always calls them Dubai roaches.
I recently made a post on Facebook because that's another thing I was going to mention too. I have the California king snake and the Honduran or the Pueblan milk snake. And I have them bioactive by accident, just started. I didn't even know what bioactive was. But I ordered some milk cow or dairy cow isopods like 18 months ago.
Yep.
And just like 10 days ago, I found a dubia roach in the enclosure and I didn't know what it was. I was so excited. I posted on Facebook. I'm like, look at this. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. Look how it moves. And then I get all these comments. It's a roach. And so then my neighbors are like, that's just the kind of thing we would worry about.
Yeah, right.
So,
of course.
It had to have come in on the isopods, right? How would it have gotten in?
It's possible it came in on the isopods or in a plant. So if it's an imported plant or something like that, it's possible.
No imported plants and just the soil that came out of the earth by the river here. So we don't. I looked it up on Google. We don't have those here.
Yeah, no, those are not a native roach. So that's interesting. So yeah, they probably came in with the isopods then.
So I edited my post on Facebook, and the first thing you see is, to my neighbors, this is an exotic bug that is a real honor to have in my house, and no bugs come out of the enclosures.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, that was fun.
Oh,
well,
man.
Golly, Jeremy, we've been chatting for, I think, going over 2 hours. So I
love it. It didn't feel like it.
I know, not at all. It was so much great information. I noticed, I can't remember who said it now, if it was Scissor G or somebody else, that you're a teacher or were a teacher.
Yeah. Before I moved to North Carolina, when I was still living in Massachusetts, I was a music teacher. So I went to school for music, ironically as a performance major, because I didn't want to be a teacher. And then inevitably looking for work, was contacted by one of the private music schools in my hometown, and they offered me a position. So I taught private trumpet lessons, and then I worked in the outreach department in the public schools. So I did that for about 9 years.
Very nice. Yeah, that was neat to get to find out where Brassman came from before.
Yeah, absolutely. The full scope of the story on that is at Tinley. I think it was back in 2016. I was at the US Arc auction, and Phil knew that I played trumpet. So when I won one of the animals that was being auctioned off, he said, "Sold, thank you, Brassman." And it just kind of stuck after that. So that is how Brassman Reptiles came to be.
That is beautiful. I love that. It's so organic.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, if you want to name my business for me, I'll take it. It's less thinking I have to do.
It just came about. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Baloo, I see you asked how many different types of emerald tree boas there are, and there are just two: the northern emerald tree boa, the Corellius caninus, and the basin emerald tree boa, which is mostly comes from the south of the Amazon River, and those are the basins or Corellius batisi. But then you have Ed Marino with his designers, and then you have snowflakes and aliens and diamonds and what'd you say earlier? The fence,
barbed wire. Yeah,
barbed wire. So that's what we have there, and it was only one species until 2009. It wasn't even that long ago that we separated into two species. Jeremy, it's been amazing.
Absolutely. I had a blast. And
we're going to, I'll shoot you a message about the roundtable. And I'm really excited because you've been a pioneer in the reptile world for decades, really. I'm sure your true pioneership, came a little bit later, but, just making your way through everything. And then for you to have actually hands-on experience over time, developed this tub that can be an amazing habitat. It's just incredible.
I seriously appreciate that. And it's been working with reptiles has been a blessing. It really has. And I'm happy to still be doing it all these years later. And I'm excited for what the future holds.
And tell us your YouTube channel and a little bit about your podcast before we leave, so people know who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can search me up on YouTube and really all social platforms at Brassman Reptiles. And then, I co-host a podcast called the Reptile Talk Podcast with my good friend, Rob Christian. And basically, I started the podcast originally when I was still in high school with my friend, Stephen Tillis, now Dr. Stephen Tillis. And we paused it when we both went to college. And I wanted to start it back up after I had started working at Nerd, and Steve was still in the process of pursuing his doctoral degree, so he couldn't commit the time. And I asked him if I could ask somebody else to come do it with me, because I really wanted to do it. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And, do it up. And so I reached out to Rob. We were both working at Nerd at the time, and we've known each other for many, many years. And tomorrow we're going to be recording episode 158 with our friend Ryan Martinez from the Miami Zoo. And I'm super stoked about it. And I appreciate all the support for everybody that's checked out the podcast. It's been a wild ride. And I'm excited for the future of that too.
Very nice. Thanks, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy.
Jeremy, I'll be talking to you soon, and Chris is going to sign us off, and I will be right back to say goodbye to all of you guys.
Perfect.
Under neon lights so cold they hum, shadows of scales where whispers come. A world of emeralds and tales untold, chasing the warmth in a world so cold. Happy basins we rise and glow, charmed Trojan stories the world should know. Emerald dreams in the twilight sky, together we thrive as the days go by. Amy speaks with a voice so kind, spreading the knowledge to ease the mind. Through winding paths, scales and